It is incredible what those individuals are doing now and what a couple of those individuals have been doing for years to hold up this offense. And Kirk deserves some credit, believe me. He's the head coach. I'm not saying he deserves zero credit for this. I hate when people say that Kirk has been riding the coattails of Phil Parker and LeVar. I think that's an ill-conceived and naive comment to make. I think there's a big part of winning close games that has direct correlation with head coaching and certainly responding to adversity. You made the mention to me yesterday, Mark, and I agree with you. If there's anybody that's going to lead their troops through an adverse moment like what we saw Saturday, it's Kirk Ferentz. And maybe it will turn into more than one loss. I hope it doesn't. But if there's anybody you trust to rally the troops and get past what we saw Saturday that became a national storyline, it's Kirk Ferentz. So it's incredible what those guys do. And at the same time, I'll say the same thing I said last year and the year before that and the year before that. It's such a shame that the Iowa offense cannot at least be average. Just average. I mean, at this point, we could say at least be not terrible. But if they were average, your guy, Urban Meyer, said 2 weeks ago on the Big Ten Network, he says if this program had this is Urban Meyer himself, if this team had an average offense, they'd be competing for national championships. That's what Urban Meyer said. So all the people that say, yeah, it's not reasonable. Yeah. Urban Meyer made the comment, not me. Although I've been saying it for 3 years. I think you've been saying it for 3 years. And it just continues to go back to my soapbox, which people get tired of me throwing out there, of what happens when Kirk leaves. Does Phil leave? Does LeVar go somewhere else? And if so, what a waste of a final 3 to 4 years or whatever it is with this elite level of special teams and defensive play. So that's where I'm at. I mean, I know that we've been talking about that for so long, but it's just kind of the after effects of what we saw Saturday.
I think there's a few different reasons why the average college football fan, and even people that know the game pretty well, or even people in the media, discount what you just stated, what we've talked about, and what Urban Meyer confirmed here in the last few weeks. Number one, people are enamored with offense. Iowa is the only one of its kind. We've seen others on the opposite end of the spectrum. USC currently. We've seen Oregon teams in the past. We've seen a couple of Ohio State teams somewhat in that opposite category. Oklahoma, where, if they just had an okay defense, an average defense, they would probably do this, this, and that. And so there's such an aberration on the other end of the spectrum. And of course, those national championship contending programs and teams that I talked about wasn't like they had the 133rd ranked defense. They had like 70th ranked defenses that you're thinking, well, at those programs, they should be much better than that. Can you imagine Iowa having people that understand stats and look at metrics and love to look at the stats, just go to any of the meaningful categories on offense and just elevate Iowa to like 70? And which I guess is average. It's roughly, but even 30 spots to 100th in the nation. And it's a decided difference.
Let me tell you something right now, and this is going to make some people depressed if they care at all what I have to say. If they had a top 7, if they were ranked 70th, I'd even go 80th or 90th on offense in the country, we would be sitting here right now, Mark, saying they have a legit shot at the college football playoff. Legit. And I don't care if they lost it. They may have still lost at Penn State because that's a tough place for anybody to play. But they'd have one loss right now. And with that offense and this defense and this special teams unit, we could see them beating Michigan, Ohio State, or Penn State in the championship game. That's conceivable. But even when they had one loss prior to Saturday, we talked about it, but it's so inconceivable to believe that Iowa could compete with those powers with this offense. It's incredible. And Mark, we're 8 games into the season, and the season flies by. It always does. But this is exactly what we knew. You and I both knew this was going to happen. And I'm not trying to put us on a pedestal. I'm sure a lot of people made the same prediction. But when the decision was made last year to double down and not do anything with Brian Ferentz, and I'm not saying I've made it clear Brian's not the only problem here, but when the heels were dug in further, and Gary Barta bowed to the situation, and allowed it to continue with this little 25-point stipulation that may not end up meaning anything, you and I both knew this was going to happen. We thought maybe the offense would be better. We thought probably that was the glimmer of hope that I had was, hey, you're bringing in Cade McNamara, you're bringing in Eric All. Well, those two guys are gone. They're done for the season. And really, I think it came down to Cade. If we got a healthy Cade, what would this offense be? I would guess it wouldn't be dead last in the FBS. I don't know where it would be, but it would be where I would have expected it to be. Maybe a little higher, maybe a little worse. But I mean, top 100, top 110. I know that's not good, but given where they're at and how far they are behind the next worst offense statistically, it's just incredible. I do think, here, let me just say one thing. I think it's sad. I heard today, was it Pat McAfee? Somebody sent me a clip from the Pat McAfee show. And I don't, for the record, I don't watch Pat McAfee. I have nothing against him. It's not really my style of content that I consume, but I understand he's huge and people love watching his show. I guess there's an Iowa fan on his panel. And I guess he went off today on Iowa and on Deacon Hill and on the call, but on Kirk and Brian and the quarterback situation. The comment was made, I didn't think it was possible we could get a quarterback worse than Spencer Petras, but we did. I think that's an unfair statement to make about Deacon Hill. I just do. Deacon Hill has been starting for 3 games. People forget how bad, and I'm not here to rip Spencer Petras, but go back and watch some of 2021 or 2022, how bad quarterback play was. Deacon Hill is no worse than Spencer Petras. If anything, he's a little bit tougher because he is bigger. All right. He's been taking a beating each and every week. Now, is he getting the job done? Of course not. Not even close. Do I think they ought to entertain the idea of auditioning a couple different quarterbacks on game day? Yes. I've been saying that for so long. But I'm not here to rip Deacon Hill. It's just he ain't getting it done. But again, piece after piece after piece we throw out there, Mark, and nothing works, and they all suck, or at least that's what people want to believe, that they're all just garbage players. What's the common denominator? That should be my mantra. I should make a design for my merch store. What's the common denominator? And then have a big picture of a certain person on the Iowa coaching staff. I mean, it's just incredible to me how people think on a micro level with all of this, even though it's stretched for, this is literally year 3. You could argue year 4 because quarterback play was really bad in 2020 as well. The difference is they ran the ball decently well in 20. So it's just incredible to me. Incredible.
This is another research point that if we had the time to dive into it or had the staff to dive into it, I would love to compare the recruiting on the defensive side versus the recruiting on the offensive side. And let's even say that the better recruiting has been on the defensive side, but it's certainly not egregious to,
no.
First of all, they are not recruiting above all the teams that we would think of. They're not recruiting better than those teams defensively. And then they are not recruiting with Kent State, Eastern Michigan, East Carolina, Akron, Sam Houston State, who's playing its first year in the FBS. They're not recruiting at that level offensively. One disclaimer to add to your Cade McNamara portion in this is they have endured an inordinate amount of injuries on that side of the ball. They've lost 2 of the best tight ends, one of the best in the country. The other one, I would say, is right there in that category. One of the best in the Big Ten, certainly, in Eric All. Luke Lachey, obviously, the other. And the 2 running backs for a series of games early in the Big Ten schedule. So there is that. But other teams overcome those issues.
At what point do we say, well, yeah, but this is the same thing we've had for 3 straight years?
Oh, I agree. I'm just bringing that to light.
Yeah, I mean, it is what it is. By the way, just want to bring this to light. You're talking about recruiting. If anybody wants to doubt what you just said about offensive recruiting, and I don't have numbers in front of me to compare how Iowa has done as far as recruiting defensive players versus offensive players. But to give you one example, people are right now so discouraged by the play of Deacon Hill, and they've been so discouraged by the play of Spencer Petras. Why can't we get better players? I just want to make clear, like Deacon Hill was committed to Fordham. All right. That's a fact. He was committed to Fordham after he left Wisconsin. So that is a fair thing to bring up. But Deacon Hill had offers out of high school from UCLA, from Wisconsin, from Kansas State. Spencer Petras had offers out of high school from Nebraska, from Cal, from Oregon State, from Syracuse, San Diego State. I mean, not necessarily powers, but Power 5 programs. It just seems odd to me that all these guys end up coming here and all of them suck. All of them aren't good. I mean, what, Alex Padilla, he's not playing at all at SMU. He had a decent offer. Let's get an offer from Georgia. And I know they throw a lot of offers out there.
Hopefully we will get Corey back here rather soon. I don't know if he's seeing that he's having feed issues right now. Appreciate everyone being here at the Voice of College Football. This is what Corey and I do each and every Tuesday, get together to talk Iowa football with all of you, 4:30 Central Time. And, of course, join Corey each and every day from the Hawkeye of the Storm. Let's get to your comments and questions and wait for Corey to make it back. Yeah, the second half performance, especially by the Iowa offense, 3 for 15 after 3 for 15 for Deacon Hill in the second half for 20 yards after a decent first half. Yeah, we got you back, Corey.
Mark, at what point do we just say, yeah, we don't recruit very well offensively? Yeah, we don't recruit great defensively. We don't recruit well. We need to recruit better, sure. But what a point do we just admit we don't know how to develop the quarterback position? We just don't. We don't know how to do that. We didn't do it well before with Ken O'Keefe. And you could argue that it was done decently well under Greg Davis. Heck, Jake Rudock and C.J. Beathard, along with Cody Sokol, who had a pretty darn good career down at Louisiana Tech, those guys were part of the Greg Davis era. Say what you want about his offense. Those guys, you could argue, were developed at quarterback. What'd you do about the problem? You had Ken O'Keefe part of the staff. Quarterbacks were always said to kind of digress under him or regress. Then you brought Ken O'Keefe back, right? Brian has moved to OC. You bring O'Keefe back. And again, same story, like people aren't getting any better. Nate Stanley didn't get any better. I mean, there was a comment. Who was it that brought it up? I think it was during the postgame show. A fan brought this, reminded me of this. There was a comment made by somebody with the Minnesota Vikings when Nate Stanley got to Minnesota fresh out of college that indicated that Nate basically admitted that they never worked on fundamentals at Iowa, passing fundamentals, footwork, that kind of stuff. That's Nate Stanley saying that. A 3-year starter who was a pretty darn successful 3-year starter, but he never really got better. Some of his best numbers were put up in 2017. Yeah. He was okay in 18. He was okay in 19, but I wouldn't argue he was any better. Spencer Petras wasn't any better. And was he better in 22 than he was in 21 or 20? And I don't anticipate Deacon Hill will be any better in 2024 if he sticks around and plays than he is this year. So I just, at what point do we just admit we don't know what we're doing with quarterbacks? And that's why it's so ludicrous. We go back to the original, the thing that happened. What was it? I don't remember when it happened now. Year and a half ago, promoting Brian Ferentz to quarterbacks coach. It's like saying, we got a huge problem here. We're just going to complicate it. We're just going to make it a bigger problem. That's all it was. That's all it was. That problem didn't even come down to Brian prior to last year. You know, Mark, I went on this show and criticized Ken O'Keefe up and down because he was a QB's coach. Now you've put the guy who is already facing tons of scrutiny, Brian Ferentz, who's never played quarterback, was a center coming out of college and in the league, had never coached quarterbacks. You have him coaching quarterbacks. So what do? They bring in John Budmeyer this past year as a analyst, even though people have said he's really the quarterback's coach. Well, he doesn't seem to be helping that much, although he's not been there long enough to maybe really tell on a grand scale. But it all comes back to the fact that Brian Ferentz was named the quarterbacks coach when he's not really the quarterbacks coach, and he doesn't know how to coach quarterbacks, is a huge problem. I don't know I don't know. I really anymore, Mark. I don't know what the biggest problem is with the offense. I don't.
Well, with that position you just addressed, we're talking about a program that brings in through television as much revenue as the top, how many teams are in the Big Ten? Top 14 teams in the country. And that is only going to skyrocket next year. Therefore, I would think that there are excellent, exceptional, at the top of the industry quarterback coaches out there who would relish the challenge of going somewhere like that. And Kirk saying, hey, we need help, obviously, develop our quarterbacks.
They're not interested. They are not. We had this discussion. What was it? A year and a half ago, and I won't drop the name. People have heard me talk about it, but you and I both know, based on results, one of the best quarterback coaches I think in college football was interested in the Iowa job when Ken O'Keefe walked away. Iowa told him no. They're not interested. They're not interested. I don't know what else to say. They're not interested. I can tell you that with 100% authority. That a really big, really good name quarterbacks coach wanted the Iowa job, was interested in the Iowa job. Iowa didn't even interview him, told him no. Brian's going to be our quarterbacks coach. That's a fact. So I get it. I get it when people say, I'm ready for this Kirk Ferentz era to be done. He's been here 24 years. I'm ready to move on. And I don't blame him. I don't blame them. But it's really hard to say that when your team is 6-1. It's very hard to say that. Very hard to have these conversations, Mark, because there will be the people that they just get volatilely angry at the fact that you're criticizing a team that's 6-1. In fact, there's probably people out there, Mark, who are angry that we're criticizing a team and a staff that's 6-2. They don't care about the numbers. They have been modeled. They have been formed like a potter shaping a piece of clay to align their thinking with the Kirk Ferentz philosophy. It is, we don't care about stats. We care about wins. Well, eventually those stats are going to translate into wins or into losses. And we saw that Saturday when you create a margin, even against a mediocre Minnesota team. When you create that thin of a margin, eventually it's going to bite you in the butt. And we didn't know if it would. We thought there was a possibility they get to 11-1 or 10-2. And they still might get to 10-2. And if we want to really live in la la land, let's bring up what I brought up to you yesterday on the Big Ten show. They went out and then destroy Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game, or destroy Penn State, or destroy Michigan in the Big Ten championship game. Could Iowa have a stake to the playoff? It could say, hey, we're 10-2, 11-2, Big Ten champions with a really dominant win over a power, and Mr. or Mrs. College football playoff chair person, we should have won that Minnesota game. Go back and look at the tape. So really, we should be 12-1 Big Ten champs with it. They could do that, but that's living in la la land, Mark. You and I both know that's living in a fantasy land. That's living in a fairy land. And, we can have those conversations. Maybe we can tickle the ears of Iowa fans, but if there's anybody that's really that disconnected with reality, maybe this isn't the place to be.
You're right about the wins and losses making it difficult for us to make a point. Although for anyone who understands football and how the game's played, and that you need 3 functional units, offense, defense, special teams, typically. Now, they can't all be the same or all exceptional or any of that, and we're not asking for that. But this team was 7-5 in the regular season last year. It's not like they are knocking on the door of a Big Ten championship every year. So they are not struggling. They are having their seasons in which they are not contending for a championship. And that defense last year certainly could contend for a Big Ten championship or win a Big Ten championship with a capable offense or a less terrible offense.
I think that defense could win a national championship. That defense was
Oh,
good enough
sure. Yeah,
to compete
of
on a
course.
national scale.
Yeah.
Think that defense had guys like Jack Campbell, who's as a rookie is doing really, really well as a linebacker for the Lions. It had Sam Laporta, who as a rookie is doing really well for the Detroit Lions. Riley Moss. That was actually, there was some talent on that team, even on offense. There was some talent on that team. But anyways, and I was just thinking, and I need to probably publish some content. Maybe this isn't the time of the year to do it, Mark. But it would be interesting to break down the enabling factors of the situation at Iowa, whether you want to call it nepotism or not. But for this perfect storm to occur, there has had to be multiple factors, a number of enabling factors at play that have lasted several years. And if you want, we can do a little draft. We can do a little Voice of College Football draft right now, Mark. You pick an enabling factor, then I pick an enabling factor. And I bet you we could get to the first round. Because, well, number one would be on the board, right? Number one on the board, Kirk Ferentz's 24-year tenure, or, last year's his 23-year tenure, 22-year tenure. That in itself gives him power that a lot of coaches wouldn't have beyond, be able to deal with the situation. Just like it gave him power in 2020 when there were some allegations against him and his staff for him to get rid of Chris Doyle and they move on. And of course, the second enabling factor would be the Big Ten West schedule. This year it's at an all-time low, but the schedule, the division has enabled the situation at Iowa. It has enabled it because the fact that they can win games, enough games. Of course, a third factor, enabling factor, would be the donors. Honestly, you could probably blame Frank Lauterbur or Bob Cummings. Those guys are enabling factors because the old timers that have the money, they go back and they say, well, Corey, you weren't alive back in 1965 and you don't remember what it was like to go out to Kinnick and get one win a year. That's the mindset. So that's an enabling factor. Having an AD like Gary Barta has long been an enabling factor. Now that factor may be gone, but is it possible that now having an interim AD, someone who's new to the job, could become the new enabling factor? Think about that, Mark. I don't know that to be the case, but just think about that for a second. Just think about how many enabling factors there are among all of this. And of course, cherry on top, you have supreme coaching performances by your DC and by your special teams coach over the course of how many years now. And some of that, obviously, again, credit goes to Kirk Ferentz for identifying those guys and putting them in positions and retaining those guys. I've said that in the past, but it's just amazing how many different enabling factors there are with the situation.
I think you need to get on that. That was a good rundown.
The one I missed was the fan base, right? Just the fan base in general. They still, they sold out the season, in June or July, after everybody was so upset that Brian was kept on staff, and they sell out the games in June or whatever it was. So, what do you expect? What do you expect?
Currently, Utah is the 100th ranked offense in college football. The Utah team that just beat USC at the Coliseum Saturday night and put up 34 points. And so Utah has not only lost its starting quarterback, but its backup quarterback, and has been playing with a third string quarterback. And they've been playing with a converted defensive back as their best running back because they had injuries there. And look at the difference just to go from 133, where Iowa is, to 100, which again, most people, 100th offense in the country, they're awful. They would have to improve by 113 yards per game. And anytime we deal with averages, folks, I don't think it sinks in with a lot of people. That's an enormous disparity because that's every game. An average of 113 from 232 to 345 in total offense per game. And we're talking about a team that's played Florida, Oregon State, USC, UCLA. So they've played a tough schedule, and they average exactly 1 yard per play more than Iowa. That's a lot. That's significant. 1 yard, 1 full yard per play.
Utah and Iowa are 130 yards difference.
133.
Okay, 133
I'm
times
sorry.
8. Huh?
I'm sorry. 113.
113 times 8. That's 900 more yards that Utah State has on the season, assuming both have played 8 games. Maybe Utah's got a bye. But anyways, 900 more yards on the season. That is a lot. Think about that. That's like, well, how many games is that for Iowa? How many games would they need to get to 900 yards? They'd need
almost 4. Just under 4 games.
Think about that. It's a third of the season just to get to that mediocre level. Remember when I said preseason, Mark, and this didn't pan out because we didn't see Cade McNamara in play. And I said earlier today, they would be better with Cade McNamara. But I made the comment that Cade McNamara was going to disappoint a lot of Iowa fans. Because there were some Iowa fans that just thought, well, he's going to be the solution. And yeah, they're not going to be top 50, but they'll be top 60 or 70. They were never going to be top 60 or 70. Cade was not going to make them that good. Okay. Not Cade McNamara. Now, maybe he would have put them on the same level of like a Utah. That might have been a reasonable expectation. But man, what we've seen is so much different. And, really the narrative that I've been pushing here since Saturday, and again, who cares what I push, what narratives I push, but I asked Don Patterson the question, and I asked Tom Kakert the question because Tom, been on the beat forever and, does a really good job for On3 with HawkeyeReport.com. And I asked him the question after the game. I said, obviously Kirk, he responds the way he responds when asked about potentially making a change at quarterback. But I looked at Tom and I said, Tom, and Don was with us. I said, what is the problem? Why is Kirk so obstinate? Why is he so stubborn about not even being determined to not even give another quarterback a series? We're not even asking him. We're not asking for a change. I'm not asking for a change. I'm not asking them to start Joe Labus or start Marco Lainez. Give one of those guys a series. And the only defense that Kirk would have had a little over a week ago was, and he made the defense after the Wisconsin game, is, well, we just won a game by 9 on the road at Wisconsin, and Deacon didn't turn the ball over. That's the defense. But what did Deacon do on Saturday? He turned the ball over. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. So what are we gaining just going with what we have? And I think the idea is, and I've heard this from people within Iowa, they've said these very words, that the way Kirk and this staff look at the offense, especially when it comes to quarterback play and being creative, is they don't feel the need to be kind of good at a bunch of little things. They'd rather master one thing. So they don't want to throw a bunch of quarterbacks out there because they'd rather just work at getting this quarterback and the way we play here proficient first. Well, we've been working on that aspect of things for years and nothing's happening. So sometimes you got to be a little creative, Mark. And I bring up the example of Jeff Brom. And yeah, Brom's offense was, really good even with one quarterback. But in 2021, they came into Iowa City, played 3 different quarterbacks, did it masterfully, and put a killing down on the Hawkeyes. Maybe common sense would tell you, hey, like this guy's a pretty good offensive mind over at Purdue. And we got spanked. We got spanked with a wooden handle 2 years ago in our own stadium against this guy with 3 different quarterbacks in his roster. Maybe we could think about having a few plays ready, even if it's not Cooper DeJean that you use in a Wildcat, which we've talked about. Bring in Joe Labus for a series. Even bring in the true freshman, Marco Lainez. Could you imagine how, I literally believe you would have medics all over Kinnick Stadium on Saturday, or the Saturday that this happened, because people's minds would literally blow up if they saw Marco Lainez go out there for even one play. That's how far-fetched the idea is in the Iowa City climate. And yet with other programs, including Don Patterson's offenses of yesteryear, they played multiple quarterbacks. Hayden Fry, there were times where they played multiple quarterbacks because they wanted to see what each of them could do against equal competition. We could do an hours long podcast on this, Mark.
It is a fascinating topic that just seems to perpetuate itself over and over and over each and every week.